A century ago, the world was in the grips of the Spanish flu pandemic, and it was the influence of traditional Chinese medicine that saved the lives of an entire community in rural Oregon. This is the story of Chinese immigrants and what they built in the Oregon wilderness at the height of the gold rush. This is the story of Kam Wah Chung.
In many ways, I think Doc Hay was an example of an early immigrant pursuing the American dream.
He was well respected by everyone.
He was very good at what he did. He was able to treat patients that were not normally treatable by Western medicine standards at the time.
Doc Hay is credited with saving many lives. They say that no one in his care died of the flu when it struck this community in January 1920.
He genuinely tried to help all of the people in his community.
And Doc Hay really was a person that could treat almost anything.
The area where he was practicing was one of the few areas to not have any deaths during the Spanish flu epidemic.
Each one of these herbs tells a fascinating story. In a lot of ways, we can see some of what Doc Hay must have been treating back in the day. For example, this is ephedra. In the late 1800s, ephedra started a revolution in science in Japan. They isolated ephedrine from ephedra, which had been known in Chinese medicine for over 1800 years. They had been using it for treating common cold, difficulty breathing, and it was long regarded as one of the most effective medicines in Chinese medicine. So it was one of the first places they thought to look.
The difference in traditional Chinese medicine compared to modern pharmaceutical medicine is that we're not typically using just one plant or one herb to treat one disease or one condition or one complaint. It's a formula or a combination of herbs that are used together.
This is an herb that originally came from India. This plant, they call it either Aucklandia or Sauceria. This specimen from Doc Hay is very intriguing because we're not sure. Did it come from India? Had it already been grown in China? Was it wild? Was it cultivated? And the aroma is still there, even after nearly 100 years.
Many of the pharmaceutical medications that we're using today in modern medicine are somewhere along the line derived from plants. Opioid medications are derived from a plant.
Doc Hay encountered quite a lot of conditions back in his day.
For me, the most remarkable part is that he was a country doctor. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't someone who had a ton of training, but he knew what his community needed.
Doc Hay was originally an immigrant from southern China in the area around Guangdong. And during that time, there were many Chinese immigrants who came to America around the gold rush era.
When the gold rush started in Oregon in 1862, the first blossoming of a community was actually Canyon City, which is just up the road. And it had a small Chinatown attached to it, Lower Town, Tiger Town.
The area near John Day originally had an incredible amount of gold, somewhat equivalent to about $1 billion of gold, but it was excavated relatively rapidly. And during that time period, there was a lot of competition between Chinese laborers and gold miners, as well as the other seekers of gold.
But because of ongoing racism in the community and increasing tensions around labor, in 1885, they burned to the ground the Chinatown area in Canyon City. And so a second Chinatown in John Day, which had been a small community, blossomed into the main Chinatown in the area. So that was really the foundations of John Day as a city. It actually began as a Chinatown.
By the time that Doc Hay actually arrived and became partners with Langan in 1888, he was already a medical practitioner.
And they built a very thriving community here. Kam Wah Chung served as a general store. It also served as a medicinal dispensary. It was a community center that brought people together.
These two gentlemen were so important in the community that they were able to weather some of the discrimination that happened during the height of the exclusion era.
Once they got established here, they say, hey, we can make a good living here.
Being one of the only doctors in several miles was a really important tool for this becoming an anchor business in the community that was respected and valued outside of just the Chinese neighborhood.
In a time of great racial tension, in a time when it was extremely difficult to be on the frontier. But the fact that Dak He persevered, he saw the patients that he wanted to take care of, he helped the local community, he found himself eventually becoming integrated into the community. Even after the Chinese community had largely moved on, Dak He was an accepted and integrated part of his local town.
As the gold dried up, as opportunities in the area dried up, more and more Chinese migrated to bigger cities like San Francisco, Portland area. And so by the early 20th century, like 1910, 1915, really Long An and Dak He were two of the last Chinese people left in this community.
For some reason, they chose to stay here. They became Americanized. They were welcomed into the community. In spite of all the racial tensions and the bigotry that was going on, Dak He and Long An not only persevered through that, they became very successful. They were part of the community. Everyone agreed.
And in many ways, we could say that that's the ultimate markers of the American dream. Moving from abroad, overcoming poverty, struggle, discrimination, and ultimately achieving financial security, doing the work that he loved, being a part of a community that accepted him, and building a stable life that truly felt home to him.
Western researchers have only begun to uncover the secrets of Kam Wah Chung. In Taoism, which much of traditional Chinese medicine is based, there is the concept of the life force of the body called qi, the whole body approach to treatment. Within the flowing energy of qi is the yin of whole body wellness and the yang of balance syndrome treatment. This philosophy may have saved the lives of many of Dak He's patients. It also proved to medical practitioners and patients that there was more value in the Chinese approach to medicine than they had originally thought.
And it's actually quite remarkable that these ideas of qi, for example, that there's an animating force in the body, there's something that makes us alive, and that these people who are developing TCM were thinking about that, and what is it and how does it work? To draw a correlation, we can think of qi maybe roughly as the nervous system, the action potential that travels from nerve to nerve that keeps us alive and keeps us moving and keeps our heart beating and keeps our brain working. And these ideas and these theories were a way of understanding the world at the time with the tools that were available that were relatively, limited compared to what we have now.
So the Spanish flu was one of the biggest pandemics in world history. 50 million people died worldwide, and 47% of deaths in the United States were attributed to the Spanish flu. The worst part about it was it affected the very young, the very old, and also the very healthy in the middle.
The Spanish flu had a tremendous impact on many regional communities in this area.
It took a long time to come to John Day. There was a wave in the spring, a wave in the fall of 1919, and by January 1920, it really reached this community.
Well, Dak He, back in 1905, 1906, came up with a formula to treat the common flu.
And looking at the historical records of the formulas he prescribed, Dak He was absolutely prescribing many herbs that we now know to have antiviral properties, antibacterial properties, and benefits against a variety of respiratory illnesses.
Sometime in 1918, he actually modified that formula to treat the Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu, in a way, is a little bit similar to the COVID epidemic, where you have a newly emerging pathogen that is affecting a large portion of the population.
Dak He was attributed with saving many lives. Anyone in his care did not die from the flu.
We can't say that that's related to Dak He and his herbal medicine practice per se, but it is a very interesting phenomenon.
People were totally frightened. And in fact, you see that the fear of the Chinese and the fear of the flu had this tension in the community. And some folks still wouldn't trust the China doctor. However, it was word on the street that if you saw the China doctor, you would live. And if you didn't, you would die.
And so there is multiple documentation in our archives that people are starting to come to Dak He to be treated for the Spanish flu.
In fact, the most famous flu story attributed to him is that they were building and completing the roadway from Portland to John Day, which is vital for such a rural community.
And there was a lot of road workers that were starting to become ill.
And Dak He and his partner got in a car, drove out there with a big batch of tea, and served it to everyone that was trying to complete the road project.
And they were able to treat a lot of the symptoms.
They said that no one got sick on that crew to the point of death.
They were able to keep the road workers working. They were not shutting down because of the Spanish flu epidemic like most other places.
So the intervention of the China doctor and his friend to go out there and bring a tea to folks on the road so they could complete the work made it so that this community could become connected to the rest of the world. If the flu had interfered, not only would their sons have died, but they may have remained more isolated, and like many of the small mining communities around here, completely collapsed.
The area where he was practicing was one of the few areas to not have any deaths during the Spanish flu epidemic.
So they were able to complete the project, connect John Day to Portland, and that significant event for this very rural community is attributed to Doc Hay's expertise.
Many people here who have been around for a long time, their grandparents had stories of seeing Doc Hay having herbal medicines, drinking these bitter herbal teas.
I wasn't going to drink that stuff. I thought it was terrible. I'm from Canyon City, Oregon. I was born there. My mom knew Doc Hay. I was born in 1935. In 1936, I had pneumonia, double bronchial pneumonia. And from that point on, it seemed like every winter I would have the pneumonia or something severe. Mom decided to bring me down to Doc Hay because the other doctors hadn't been able to do anything for us.
Even though there's at least 5 or 6 other doctors in the community of John Day and the surrounding areas, Doc Hay was specializing in blood poisoning, like internal medicine. If there was a case that the white doctors could not help with, they would refer him to Doc Hay.
So then he got the medicines for me, and they were in a brown paper bag. When Mom took them home and put them in this pot, they looked like leaves and twigs and bones and all kinds of stuff. You couldn't distinguish what they were. Mom put it in the pot, boiled it, and then strained it and put it into jars and canned it.
He had many different formulas. They were treating various infections, respiratory infections, as well as a variety of other common ailments.
I was to drink 1 cup of that medicine for each meal. I thought it was terrible. And so my dad finally ended up having to pay me $1 to get me to finish off the medicine. And from that point on, I have never had anything that comes near pneumonia or lung congestion or any of that. But I do remember the smell.
And so we have lots of records in our archives and documentation that he really was the go-to person.
I was blessed to have Dr. Hay here at that time to give me my life back.
Doc Hay was absolutely prescribing many herbs that we now know to have antiviral properties, antibacterial properties, and benefits against a variety of respiratory illnesses.
And he really specialized in not only treating influenza, but infections, sepsis, blood poisoning, open wounds, things that are life or death matters for a rural community. Before the invention of antibiotics, someone could easily die from cutting their arm open a barbed wire fence, getting sepsis, and then passing away from an infection. So Doc Hay had an arsenal of things to treat not only influenza, but infections. And because of that, there's received wisdom that I know was effective from the anecdotal stories, and the more I explore what's actually in the formulas, the more I come up with creative strategies to deal with what are still problems for people today.
There's still many things left to explore. Just today we were examining many bags of herbs that have never been formally identified, that have been stored here since before 1920. So it's a very unique place in America with a very unique piece of American history.
I'm continuously amazed about the things that I find in his collection.
What else, if there's another pandemic that's coming worldwide, maybe we have the answer right here and we don't even know it yet.
I would bring anyone to Doc Hay if he was still here. That he would be the only doctor I would go to. I wish he were here now.
He lived a very, very humble life. He could have afforded a much more extravagant lifestyle, but he didn't require that. The thing that really gave him meaning, that made an impact in his community, was the relationship that he had with the people of John Day.
And there is so much more to learn. It is, to me, very important that we tell this story, because not only is it a local community story, this is becoming a statewide story. This is becoming a national, worldwide story.
I have come back several times to this building, and each time it brings back memories. It's just a life experience that you never forget. Even though I was very young, it made an impression on me, and I'm glad to be here again.
They say the story of America is an immigrant story, a tale of hardship, hard work, and integration. For Doc Hay, it was also about legacy of care. Doc Hay died in 1952 at the age of 90. By the end of his life, many people were coming to be treated by the legendary Doc Hay of John Day, Oregon. Money meant little to Doc Hay. All that mattered was the well-being of the patients he treated. People treated as he would want to be treated. Confucius's golden rule with dignity, respect, and loving care. After Doc Hay's passing, hundreds of uncashed checks were found at Kam Wah Chung, many from people treated during the Depression.